groundbreaking penetrate the mainstream, and I feel Deathstroke is that new exciting character.
Supergirl, Alan Scott, the Green Lantern of Earth 2. All these characters are facing off against the best they can to hold off against unstoppable odds. And so as this section of the video begins to wind down, what ends up happening is the Black Lantern central power battery is teleported to Coast City by the Scarred Guardian. And what we end up finding out is that with the central power battery charged at 100%, what it does is it allows the living embodiment of death, the entity known as Nekron, to enter into the earthly plane, to enter into the main DC universe and make its presence known, while simultaneously resurrecting every single person who's ever died in Coast City and dragging them into the Black Lantern Corps. Okay, so a few things. First and foremost, I had intended to finish Green Lantern Blackest Night by the time Halloween ended. But then I was going through and I was like, well, we haven't really done anything with like the Green Lantern tie-in or the Green Lantern Corps. Well, the funny thing about this is that the Green Lantern mythos is just largely those two titles. That's really all it is. They cross over in terms of like big events like Sinestro Corps War, different things like that. But usually they tell two distinctly different stories from two distinctly different perspectives. The issue I ran into is we wouldn't be able to have the entirety of Blackest Night done by the time we finished all the tie-ins if we kept it every Sunday when Halloween rolls around. So we're doing it on our DC days. We get 3 Green Lantern videos a week. I guess 3 Blackest Night videos a week, rather. So if you've loved Blackest Night, you're going to be hyped. We're still going to keep our DC Rebirth stuff, so we're going to have to double upload, which works because, like, for the next couple weeks, it'll basically be Green Lantern, Blackest Night, and Dark Knight's Metal on the DC days. So I'm sure a lot of you guys will be over the moon in terms of the stuff that we're going to be doing. But again, Blackest Night really comes out of the events of Sinestro Corps War. That's really all this is, and that's why Sinestro Corps War is so important. One of the things that we learned over the course of Jeff Johns' entire run of Green Lantern is that there was this prophecy called the Prophecy of Blackest Night. And the idea was that over the course of the existence of the universe, these different corps would come into existence. The Red Lanterns would come into existence, and the Blue Lanterns would come into existence, and the Star Sapphires, and the, Indigo Tribe, and all that kind of stuff. All these lanterns would rise to prominence. Most all of them would be super obscure, and almost nobody would know about them, save for the Green Lanterns themselves, and then the Sinestro Corps, when they rose to power during the events of Sinestro Corps War. But the Prophecy of Blackest Night basically stated that there would be this war of light among all the Lantern Corps, and the result is that the Black Lanterns would basically rise and then eliminate all life in the universe. And that's exactly what's happening. The Guardians of the Universe, some of the most powerful beings in existence, knew about the Prophecy of Blackest Night. They believed the Prophecy of Blackest Night was fear-mongering. It was an attempt to strip Green Lanterns of their power by instilling in them this belief that the universe would come to an end and all these Lantern Corps would rise. And in doing so, Green Lanterns would cease to be as powerful as they once were, paving the way for almost any number of other villains to rise to power. Now, because of that, when Sinestro Corps War popped off, and in the aftermath of Sinestro Corps War, once we got into Infinite Crisis and those storylines, and once the Black Lanterns started to rise, the Guardians of the Universe kind of looked around and said, well, I guess they were right. The problem is that this created a rift of sorts, because a couple of the Guardians named Ganthet and Sade always believed the prophecy was going to come into existence. And so in order to prepare for it, they created the Blue Lantern Corps, and the Blue Lantern just kind of existed out there. The fact remains here that in the presence of all these Black Lantern rings, when we began covering Blackest Night, we basically did issues 1 through 4 and then stopped and started doing tie-ins. The reason for that is because everything that we're covering right now in terms of these tie-ins, really, until I say otherwise, this is all taking place during the first 4 issues of Blackest Night. The other half of this is that almost everybody is encountering this in their own way at the outset. The Green Lantern Corps is encountering all this stuff at the outset. Hal Jordan and those guys are on Earth, they're encountering it. John Stewart is actually just sort of pondering the nature of the mistakes that he's made when it came to the planet of Xanchi. Now, we talked about this before. Between 1988 and 1989, DC published a story called Cosmic Odyssey. It was a 4-part series, and it was weird. It was a really, really weird story written by Jim Starlin, but it basically detailed this idea that there was just some being called Anti-Life, more or less, that had split itself into 4 parts, and it had gone to 4 different planets. But the idea was that John Stewart was a relatively new and pretty reckless Green Lantern when he was younger, and the result was that he teamed up with Martian Manhunter to try to find a way to basically keep Xanchi from being destroyed, due to the fact that if 2 of these planets were obliterated, the universe would be destroyed in its entirety. He basically screwed up, ran headlong into it, found this giant bomb in the middle of the planet, was too late to save it, and everybody on the planet died. Now, the funny thing about about John Stewart is that he is basically a Green Lantern that did not initially rise to any real significant level of popularity until Justice League came out in 2001. He was introduced 30 years old in 1970. He basically served as a backup character throughout the entirety of the Green Lantern run, running all the way up through Emerald Twilight. He had involvement in all those stories, Zero Hour, Crisis in Time, and so on and so forth, up until Green Lantern Rebirth, which is where he began to increase in popularity even more among comic book readers, just because of the fact that his popularity in Justice League, the cartoon show, and then Green Lantern Rebirth basically set him to one of the higher echelons of characters. But the idea here is that because of the fact that Xanchi was a planet that he obliterated, what this does is it basically tells us that there is no limit to what it is that the Black Lantern rings can resurrect. They can recreate anything. Xanchi itself is resurrected as an entire planet to serve the purpose of operating alongside the Black Lanterns. Now, this will eventually go into like John Stewart's own sub-story that will lead into the main Blackest Night story and actually see him do some pretty cool stuff. But what we end up doing here is we switch over to Zamaron, where the home of the Star Sapphires, as well as the Sinestro Corps. Now, one thing to keep in mind is in the aftermath of the Sinestro Corps War, there were a couple of things that had taken place. The first is that Sinestro himself had basically been defeated and captured, and the result was that the Green Lanterns were intent on taking him back to Oa to be put on trial. The problem with this was that in the middle of it all, the Green Lanterns were ambushed by a combination of the Red Lanterns, those who, survived the Sinestro Corps War, and even the Blue Lanterns themselves. And it led into this great big huge conflict, which I have a video on that you can check out down in the description. This is stuff that I suggest you check out the Green Lantern playlist just to get the full, explanation of it. But the idea was that Atrocitus, the leader of the Red Lanterns, simply wanted to obliterate all lanterns in existence, wanted to just get rid of them all in their entirety. The idea was that this led into a series of skirmishes that took place between the Sinestro Corps, the Red Lanterns, the Blue Lanterns, the Green Lanterns. In addition to all this, one of the members of the Sinestro Corps, named Amon Sur, the son of Abin Sur, who first gave Hal Jordan his Green Lantern, Amon Sur had basically eliminated the entire family of one of the Green Lanterns. And the result was that this Lantern's friend had basically discovered what was going on, and in her wrath, killed Amon Sur, despite the fact that he was basically surrendering. The result was that Lyra herself was ousted from the Green Lanterns, and in her rage was given a Red Lantern ring. And then that led into the whole skirmish of the Green Lanterns showing up, now Sinestro being captured, so on and so forth. In an effort to basically try to turn Lyra away from being a Red Lantern, because of the fact that she was one of the original Green Lanterns, Thal Sinestro had actually killed her while Hal Jordan was trying to reason with her. Hal Jordan eventually became a Red Lantern, different things like that. But this all basically goes towards this idea that the Sinestro Corps itself was experiencing what amounted to a civil war, in the sense that you had Thal Sinestro, who had finally been captured by the Green Lanterns and was being held prisoner. While that was going on, a villain named Mongul, who is by and large as strong, if not stronger than Superman, depending on what stories you're reading, was given a Yellow Lantern ring himself, and then basically co-opted leadership of the Sinestro Corps and took it over in Sinestro's absence. And so what you basically had were members of the Sinestro Corps who were loyal to Mongul, and the
At Show Me Cables, we always work hard for our customers. Our products are used in mission-critical applications every single day. We all know that if the cable goes down, then the whole system can go down. And that's why we don't slow down until the last box is left without. Here at Show Me Cables, we're proud of the fact that we ship 97% of all of our orders same day. And in fact, if you order by 5, we'll make sure it gets out that same day. Whether you need peace of mind that the parts are on their way, or if you need to get your system up and running, you can trust Show Me Cables to get the job done.
Here's what we want everyone to do. Count all the hugs you haven't given, all the hands you haven't held, all the dinners you didn't share with friends, the trips you haven't taken. Keep track of them. Each one means one less person vulnerable, one less person exposed, and one step closer to a healthier community. So for now, keep your distance, but don't lose count. We'll have some catching up to do.
The result was that when everything popped off and when everything started going to pot and it all started going awry, Sinestro made his escape. He was out. He grabbed those who were faithful and then tracked down the Star Sapphires, which leads us here. Now, the reason why he's here for these Star Sapphires is because of the fact that these Star Sapphires are based on love. And so what they did is they took a whole bunch of members of the Sinestro Corps and they started putting them in these crystals of sorts that would basically convert them to Star Sapphires. Sinestro showing up here simply serves the purpose of grabbing, his members of the Sinestro Corps, bringing them back, and then eventually going back, killing Mongol, and then taking back over his Sinestro Corps. Again, with this idea of the Red Lanterns transitioning back to Ismail, this is still the aftermath of all this stuff. Lyra's still dead, the Green Lanterns are still trying to make their escape, they're dealing with the Red Lanterns themselves, and then suddenly Black Lantern rings just start descending on everyone. So again, that's why there's so much back and forth here. That's why there's so much jumping around, is because we're talking about a war across the universe with these Black Lantern rings seemingly showing up out of nowhere. Now, the other half of this is that Star Sapphires effectively have the ability to tap into the emotions of people by way of love. And an attempt that's made by Carol Ferris, who was formerly a lover of Hal Jordan, the first Star Sapphire, and then ultimately rechristened with the Star Sapphire gem again, is that she had actually encased Sinestro in this crystal of love, more or less, and tried to convert him, or tried to begin the process of converting him. Now, under normal circumstances, what happens is that if a person's not powerful enough, when they're encased in crystal, they'll basically just kind of begin to shut down, go into a comatose state, and the conversion process will begin. But they can still resist it. They can refute the conversion. This is designed to show us how powerful Sinestro is. That where the other members of the Sinestro Corps are trying to resist this conversion, and it's taking quite a lot of time for it to happen, as soon as he's put into a crystal by Carol Ferris, he immediately shatters out of it, because it's basically this idea that he is, in a lot of ways, the walking, talking, living embodiment of fear. Now, the problem with this is that in the middle of their skirmish, much like the skirmish between the Red Lanterns and the Green Lanterns and all that stuff, we're basically met with the arrival of the Black Lanterns. And so again, that's why I say all this takes place over the course of the first 4 issues, is because this is basically all these different groups in the middle of their ongoing conflicts, basically in the middle of this war of light, and then suddenly the Black Lanterns start appearing out of nowhere. The other half of this is the Orange Lantern Larfleeze, who's basically kind of an outlier. When it comes to all the Lantern Corps that exist in DC Comics, they effectively have this governing rule in the sense that only those who are able to overcome great fear can become Green Lanterns. Only those who are basically able to manipulate fear and use that fear to empower themselves can become Sinestro Corps members, so on and so forth. Larfleeze is not like any of the other corps. Larfleeze is the Orange Lantern of greed, of avarice. And so the idea is that he has the whole of the Lantern Corps power to himself, which makes him insane in terms of the kind of things that he can do. But the idea here is that because the Blue Lanterns were so intriguing to Larfleeze, when the opportunity arose, which we had covered previously, for him to basically capture the Blue Lanterns, when he was introduced to the idea that they exist, he basically took all of his constructs and just sent them all directly to the Blue Lanterns themselves. Now, that's the inherent difference between Larfleeze as an Orange Lantern and everybody else. All the other Lantern Corps have multiple members: the Blue Lanterns, the Red Lanterns, the Green Lanterns, Yellow Lanterns. But with Larfleeze, his corps consists of constructs. Anyone he's ever killed becomes a construct. They become something for him to control. The problem with this is that, again, with Larfleeze having killed so many people, his base of operations is a giant graveyard. It means when Black Lantern rings start descending onto Larfleeze's base of operations, it's nothing but Black Lanterns that start rising everywhere. It's just him by himself, but his power is extreme, and we'll actually find out just how powerful he is in the next few videos or so. But the idea is that, again, this is why the Blue Lanterns are fighting the Orange Lanterns, is because it's the constructs of Larfleeze trying to overpower the Blue Lanterns and then take their rings from them so he can just hoard the rings for himself. It's just this giant treasure trove, that he essentially keeps around. And so the idea here is that with this war of light going on, with the Black Lanterns rising themselves, what it does is it begins to shift its focus to the idea of the Indigo Tribe. Now, before we jump into that, what we actually end up doing is picking up with the Green Lantern Corps line of stories, which is to say all the other Green Lanterns that are out there, minus Hal Jordan. And the idea here is that this picks up in the aftermath of a story called Emerald Eclipse. Now, Emerald Eclipse we didn't cover, we didn't really have a reason to, just because the entire basis of the story we could explain later on within the span of 5 or 6 minutes. But the whole idea of Emerald Eclipse is it was basically DC finally finding a way to deal with the character of Sodom Yat. For those of you guys who don't know, Sodom Yat is what's called a Daxamite, and Daxamites live on the planet Daxam. Somewhere along the line in DC's history, some Kryptonians basically left the planet of Krypton and then took up residence on Daxam. Over time, they basically became xenophobic. The result is that as time progressed, if somebody from another planet or something like that showed up on their home, they would basically be destroyed or something along those lines. Sodom Yat hails from that race of people. Much like Superman, if he's exposed to a yellow sun, he'll develop Superman powers. The idea was that as a child, he had come across what amounted to a spacefaring explorer crash landing on his home world, and his actual existence was kept hidden away from everybody, just so that they wouldn't, freak out when he was there. But through this explorer, Sodom Yat learned about the greater universe, about the Green Lantern Corps, and all these different races that exist out there, and so on and so forth. The problem was that when this explorer was discovered, he was basically taken, killed, and stuffed by the Daxams themselves. This created an absolute hatred for his own race and their xenophobic views at the hands of Sodom Yat. In response to this, when he was given the opportunity to become a Green Lantern, he immediately took it. Now, he became significant in the Green Lantern mythos for two reasons. The first is because it was believed that if someone like Superman ever became a Green Lantern, they'd be the most powerful lantern in existence, because it's basically the powers of Superman combined with the powers of a lantern ring. And so that would be hitherto almost unchecked powers. The other half of this is that he was destined to become the new Ion. When DC originally launched the events of Emerald Twilight and 0 Hour Crisis in Time, Hal Jordan became possessed by Parallax, all that kind of good stuff, he eliminated almost the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps. Kyle Rayner basically became a being called Ion, which basically allowed him to house the entity, in the sense that he was basically able to single-handedly resurrect the entirety of the Green Lanterns. That's what the Ion entity is. Should all the Green Lanterns be killed, the Ion can bring them all back. He can basically bring back the Guardians and the Central Power Battery and all that kind of stuff. The whole idea is that because Sodom Yat was so powerful, during the events of Mongol running the Sinestro Corps, he basically invaded the planet of Daxam. Sodom Yat intervened, and in the midst of it all, basically took the red sun, or flew himself into the red sun, and then used his own energies and converted it into a yellow sun, gave all of his people Superman powers, and they fought off the Sinestro Corps. And that's basically it. That's the gist of it. But the idea is that he was believed to have been left for dead. He was believed to have died. Now, he didn't, and he'll come back during the events of Brightest Day. But at the time, he was believed to have been gone, and it allowed DC to put him on the back burner. But while there isn't a whole lot of meat and potatoes to the Green Lantern Corps story, what this basically does, or at least in terms of this story, is it deals with the idea that with these Black Lantern rings descending on all these different people, everybody's having to deal with it in their own way. For the character of Kyle Rayner, he basically sees this sort of reincarnation of the character Jade, the daughter of the Green Lantern Alan Scott, who Kyle Rayner had been in love with and who had ultimately died. Because of the fact that Jade, alongside almost all the other girlfriends that he's had, have all perished in tragic circumstances, it's a haunting factor of Kyle Rayner. That's one of the reasons why he never really gets into relationships, or if he does, it's tedious, because for him, he's always afraid the girlfriend he has is going to get quote-unquote stuffed in a refrigerator. That's the big concern that goes on in his mind when it comes to other people. The other half of this is it actually shows how sadistic the Black Lanterns are, in the sense that they actually bust into a infirmary, for the most part, where all these Green Lanterns are healing from various injuries, the conflicts they've been in, and they literally go in and just start tearing out their hearts. I mean, it's pretty intense in terms of what it is that they end up doing here. But again, this is the first appearance of the Black Lantern rings to a vast majority of the Green Lantern Corps. So again, it's pretty cool in terms of how it all unfolds. But jumping back to Sinestro, jumping back to the Black Lanterns, the fact that these Black Lanterns are basically emerging, two of the most important ones come in the form of Amon-Sor and Aaron-Sor. Now, Aaron-Sor was at one time the only person that Sinestro had actually loved, and Soranik Natu is the daughter of Aaron-Sor and Sinestro himself. We learned that during the events of, God, I want to say it was when the Red Lanterns captured Sinestro himself. But the idea here is that facing off against these Black Lanterns, keep in mind, the Black Lanterns themselves basically feed on emotion. The whole idea is that they are basically emotional batteries, in the sense that they force all these different people they come across to feel fear or rage or whatever the case may be. And those emotions charge up that person's heart. And when that person's heart is charged, the Black Lanterns take their hearts, consume them, and all that energy feeds the Central Power Battery. The reason why that's important is because because when the central power battery is at 100%, the entity that represents the Black Lantern Corps is Nekron himself, and it will allow him to enter the realm of the living. That's why this is a huge deal. And so again, that's why this is so huge, is because in the middle of this all, the Indigo Tribe finally steps in. And the whole goal here is for them to essentially be the voice of reason, the voice of logic. And they will be the ones who will basically come together and say, we have to unite the Lantern Corps against the Blackest Night. We cannot let them down, because if we do, then what this will do is it will basically live up to the prophecy. And so with that in mind, the Indigo Tribe, Indigo One, at least the leader of the Indigo Tribe, basically grabs Sinestro and takes him directly to Mongol, because the whole idea here is to eliminate Mongol and reunite the Sinestro Corps, because they need every single living member of every single Lantern Corps and more to defeat the Black Lanterns. It's a coming together of every living being in existence to fight off against the Black Lanterns and have it come to a head in a massive battle. Thal Sinestro is just one with his own Lantern Corps. He knows how to use it in a way that nobody else does. Mongol is just this heavy hitter. He's just this slugger. That's really all it is. He's really, really smart and he's very capable, but he's not a master of the Sinestro Corps. Sinestro actually overpowers and eliminates Mongol right off the bat. And so what this does is it basically leads into this idea that we're going to see the return of the Sinestro Corps, and we're eventually going to see a continued call to arms. All these Lantern Corps coming together to join the Earth's superheroes and face off against the Black Lantern Corps, which will ultimately lead into the rise of the White Lanterns. Okay, so continuing our discussions on Blackest Night, at this point we pick up with the second part, and this focuses partly on the Green Lantern Corps and the second half on the Green Lantern title itself, again, much like we did in the previous video. Now, in the last video, we had basically dealt with this idea that there were two things happening in the universe at the same time. I mean, the Black Lantern rings are basically these rings that attach themselves to those who have been deceased, and they resurrect them for the purpose of emotionally charging other individuals, so that when those individuals' hearts are just filled with all different types of emotions, the Black Lantern takes their heart, consumes it, and it feeds their central power battery, charging it up to 100%. Now, the idea here is that in the last video, we basically mentioned that the Black Lantern rings basically spreading throughout the universe was a massive calamity, because what it meant is that individuals who had died across the universe were being resurrected, no matter what planet they were on, and we even saw entire planets being resurrected by the Black Lantern rings. Now, of course, all this goes towards the entity of Nekron, which is to say, in the DC universe, when it comes to the emotional spectrum, you've got entities that represent those spectrums. They're not really gods. They're really more just kind of like avatars. And so Nekron is kind of this living embodiment of death, so to speak. But the idea here is that the goal of the Black Lanterns is to basically charge the central power battery to 100% so that it will basically open a gateway and allow Nekron to enter the living realm. And all of this is important because of the fact that this feeds into the War of Light. It feeds into the rise of the Black Lanterns. All these Lantern Corps going to war against one another. While that's happening, the Black Lanterns rising to prominence, ultimately eliminating all life in existence, and then ushering in this basically Blackest Night, this eternal darkness in the universe. And so with the Green Lantern Corps, this again focuses on basically everybody except for Hal Jordan, the main Green Lantern, quote unquote, in the DC universe. And so we basically end up picking up with like Seratic Natu and these characters. And we had talked about how the Black Lanterns were really sadistic because they would basically kill anybody. In this instance, it was the Black Lanterns going to the infirmary of the Green Lantern Corps, and then with those individuals who were effectively injured or who were basically unable to defend themselves, the Black Lanterns would terrify them, and when their hearts were charged, they would just seize them and take their hearts out of their bodies. So they were basically killing helpless people. So it's pretty insane in terms of how that unfolds. But again, that becomes significant because it's like classic zombie infection. The more zombies there are, the more zombies there become. Just because the Black Lanterns, once they kill someone, a Black Lantern ring suddenly bonds to that person, and the numbers bolster even further. And so that's what this is. This is a continuation of the idea that the Green Lantern Corps is basically coming to the realization that the dead are rising in the form of Black Lanterns, and the goal is to get as many people out there as they possibly can. The problem with this is that each individual member, or at least the most prominent members of the Green Lanterns, are dealing with the Black Lanterns in their own individual way. Now, this is something that happens across the board. For Seratic Natu, she's basically the top medic, the top doctor of the Green Lantern Corps. And so to see individuals being killed and then turned into Black Lanterns is her own way of basically having to deal with it, being confronted by the Black Lantern concept. Now, this means that the Black Lanterns themselves will fill her heart with emotion, with rage, with fear, with willpower, so on and so forth, and they'll try to take her out as well. But what had happened over the course of the Green Lantern Corps line of stories by Peter Tomasi is he began focusing on this idea that a kind of affection was brewing between Saranac Natu and Kyle Rayner as a Green Lantern. Now, in all honesty, this just made good sense. It's basically this idea that a lot of the girlfriends of Kyle Rayner were like, heroic, or they were very virtuous, but with Saranac Natu, she basically possesses all those character traits. She's headstrong, she's brave, she's got the drive where it counts, she's got ambition. Her goal is to be one of the greatest Green Lanterns. And so it was basically Peter J. Tomasi coming along and saying, we're going to introduce a love interest between Kyle Rayner and Saranac Natu, but she's not going to go out the same way as everybody else. The cool thing about this is that with Kyle Rayner's most recent girlfriend, a girl by the name of Jade, who was basically the daughter of the Green Lantern Alan Scott, what happened is that she essentially sacrificed her life in order to save Kyle Rayner, also imbued him with something called the Star Heart, which is basically a version of the Green Lantern energy from a different reality. And the idea here was that it helped to bolster the powers of Kyle Rayner, went towards him being Ion. We talked about that in a previous video. But the long and short of this is that Jade had basically been resurrected by a Black Lantern ring. And much like all the Black Lanterns that we've seen so far, the goal is emotional manipulation. Feed on their emotional state, whatever relationship they have, charge their hearts with energy, and then take their heart when it's filled with emotion. Jade had initially appeared to Kyle Rayner as, hey, it's okay that I pass, that's the way things go, but we can be together again. And this kind of hope, this Blue Lantern energy of hope filled Kyle Rayner. It was also willpower. It was also the belief that maybe things can work out, but it was really Kyle Rayner putting on a ruse, that he was playing along with Jade to understand the motivations of what the Black Lanterns were looking for. And that's when Kyle Rayner came to the realization the Black Lanterns are looking to charge people's hearts with emotion and then consume them. Now, in the middle of all this, because Jade had such an emotional and psychological impact on Kyle Rayner, it takes the intervention of Saranac Natu to sort of snap Kyle Rayner out completely, in the sense that he's aware of what it is that Jade's doing, but his heart can't help but feel that maybe they can be together again. Now, of course, again, Saranac Natu has no stake in Jade. She doesn't know Jade. She's never met Jade. And so Saranac Natu is the voice of reason here. She's the one that essentially kind of defies it all and jumps into the fray. Now, the other half of this are characters like Kilowog, right? For Kilowog, he doesn't really have a whole lot of emotional attachments to other people that are out there. For him, he's the drill sergeant of the Green Lantern Corps. He's very militaristic in that fashion. And so for him, it's honor and duty above all else. But as the drill sergeant for the Green Lantern, every single Green Lantern that dies feels like it's the fault of Kilowog. And that's what the Black Lanterns feed on in his case, is this idea. All these different Black Lanterns out here that were formerly Green Lanterns who died in the line of duty, they wouldn't have died if you'd done your job like you were supposed to. And that's what fills him with rage. Because remember, no matter what any of these Green Lantern Corps members feel, the Black Lanterns will feed on it. But one of the darkest moments comes from out of this when we basically find out that the children of Krib have all come back as Black Lanterns. Now, Krib was a character who was, I believe, originally introduced in the Sinestro Corps War. But Krib was basically this weird alien entity that essentially went on this pattern of killing Green Lanterns and then taking their children and making the children her own. Now, she wasn't like abusing them or anything. She would just take them, whisk them off to some planet somewhere and say, you are now my children. But the idea is that for whatever reason that hasn't been explained yet, these kids have all basically died. Now, this can largely be due to be attributed to the fact that Krib was the only one taking care of these kids. And with Krib basically having been captured by the Green Lanterns and then allowed to go with the Zamorons, the Star Sapphires, these kids were just kind of left to their own devices and ultimately ended up just perishing according to the environment. But the problem is that in the middle of all this, we end up having the arrival of one of the Indigo Lanterns. Now again, when it comes to the Black Lanterns, the only way to truly defeat them is to blast them with just a massive amount of just bright energy, basically white light. And the way in which you can pull that off is by combining rings together or something along those lines. By blasting them with a massive amount of light energy, what it does is it creates a feedback in the ring, basically causes the ring to essentially overload. And the result is that this feedback resonates throughout the Black Lantern themselves, and they simply just explode. But what this does, with the arrival of these kids, with the arrival of the Indigo tribe showing up and basically helping the Green Lanterns to stave off the Black Lantern Corps, we switch our focus to the Red Lanterns. Now again, we talked about this in the last video, in the sense that the Red Lanterns were basically dealing with the aftermath of the Green Lanterns trying to retrieve one of their own who had previously perished. And in the middle of this whole conflict, with the Green Lanterns being the only ones really left there, the Black Lantern rings started descending on everybody. And what happens is 4 of the 5 inversions are basically basically resurrected. Now, the fifth inversion is Atrocitus himself, the person who created the Red Lantern Corps. But to provide a little bit of history, for those of you guys who are watching this video for the first time, the first thing I would suggest is checking out the origin of the Red Lanterns. That way you'll fully understand who the 5 inversions are. But the long and short of this is that before the Green Lanterns were ever created by the Guardians of the Universe had created the Manhunters. And the Manhunters were basically just robots. And the belief of the Guardians is that because the robots only do what they're told, they're the perfect form to basically police the universe, to make sure that there's no credible threats with regards to people trying to obliterate planets or anything along those lines. The problem is that the Manhunters malfunction, and we'll actually find out later on down the line that it was one of the Guardians themselves that caused it to happen. But the idea is that with the Manhunters basically going awry, they traveled to Sector 666 and basically killed everyone. And so what ended up happening is the survivors of Sector 666, these 5 inversions, came together in their hatred for the Guardians of the Universe and began the process of plotting and trying to find a way to eliminate the Guardians in their entirety, along with the newly formed Green Lantern Corps. And so where Atrocitus was one of the 5 inversions, and had basically seen a vision of the future with regards to what's actually happening right now, what he in turn did is killed the other 4 inversions and then created the Red Lantern Corps. And so that's why these inversions are resurrecting, is because these are the people that Atrocitus killed. And so in this instance, with the 4 inversions popping up as Black Lanterns, Atrocitus is fearless and doesn't care. Because he's so full of rage, because rage is the one governing force of his life, his heart was already charged with full emotion. But the caveat to this, and remember, when it comes to the Red Lanterns, when they're given a Red Lantern ring, it replaces their heart. And so where the Black Lanterns attack Atrocitus for the purpose of taking his heart and consuming it, his heart will inevitably regrow. Now, this has both a benefit and a drawback. The benefit is that they can't kill Atrocitus by tearing his heart out, which means the Red Lanterns cannot be killed by the Black Lanterns, and the Red Lanterns themselves cannot become Black Lanterns, unless, of course, the ring is taken away. The drawback to this is they are basically an infinite source of emotion. As long as they keep, like, Red Lanterns prisoner, Black Lanterns could literally just repeatedly tear out their hearts and consume them until they charge the Central Power Battery. That's why this threat of the Black Lanterns has to be dealt with as fast as humanly possible. But in this instance, because Atrocitus is basically the living embodiment of rage, the Black Lanterns don't stand a chance. You know, him blasting them with massive amounts of energy and so on and so forth, again, causes these Black Lanterns to come crashing down. And so what this does is basically transition to this third part of the story, this last little bit, where we basically pick up with Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, we pick up with Sinestro, and we pick up with the Indigo Tribe, as well as the Star Sapphire. This comes out of the idea that with Sinestro having been imprisoned by the Green Lanterns after the event of the Sinestro Corps War, it allowed a villain by the name of Mongul, one of the most notable enemies in DC, and someone who's basically equal to Superman in strength in a lot of ways, to rise to power after receiving a Yellow Lantern ring, and then basically take over the Sinestro Corps himself. And so what this did is, once Thal Sinestro was freed from his imprisonment in the midst of the rise of the Black Lanterns, he went out, he basically tried to seize back control of his Sinestro Corps, and the first stop was Zamaron, the home of the Star Sapphires, because the Star Sapphires had taken a number of the Sinestro Corps and tried to convert them into Star Sapphires. And so because of that, Sinestro arriving is also met with the Indigo Tribe, you know, Indigo One, who had basically snatched Hal Jordan from Earth, brought him over to Zamaron in an effort to basically start uniting the different corps. And again, that's the basis of the Indigo Tribe. The Indigo Tribe is the Lantern Corps of compassion, but they're also the Lantern Corps of reason and logic. And so this basically puts us where we are right now with regards to a little bit of infighting, in the sense that we have Hal Jordan and Sinestro bickering among one another, but it's basically this idea that we have to begin working together. We have to function as a cohesive unit, because if we don't, this war of light will consume us all, and the Black Lanterns will just bring about the end of all things in the universe. So ultimately what this does is, again, this picks up a little bit with regards to the Blue Lanterns and the Orange Lanterns. Remember, the Orange Lanterns are basically the Lantern Corps of greed, of avarice, but instead of having an actual core, it's basically just Larfleeze himself, in the sense that his core consists of constructs. But the Blue Lanterns are basically a Lantern Corps based on hope. It's the idea that no matter how bad things get, there's always a way to overcome things. And so the power of the Blue Lanterns can only really stand some measure when it's accompanied by the powers of the Green Lanterns. The Green Lanterns are kind of the foundation that powers the Blue Lantern Corps. And that's why in this instance, despite the fact that the Blue Lanterns are largely considered to be the most powerful, they're really struggling against the Orange Lanterns, because there's no Green Lanterns there to bolster their own power. But this changes when Indigo One brings Hal Jordan and Sinestro and Star Sapphire directly to where it is the Blue Lanterns are at, because again, the Green Lanterns bolster the Blue Lantern power, and the Blue Lantern rings can supercharge the Green Lantern rings. So they're designed